We'll start out, I can then reassure you quite slowly in terms of brain work, and will not be that theoretical in my presentation, but just talk pretty straightforward about the experience that I've had curating shows, mainly solo shows, for, well, more than a decade. I think that was my own way to put it, but it's actually more than 15 years at the same institution. I was in 2001, so that's 14 years ago, I initiated a project space at the National Gallery of Denmark, where I'm working, and I was recently hired as a curator. And it's a fairly large space. It's 250 square meters at least. And from the very outstart, we succeeded in having a full sponsorship, meaning that we actually had funding to invite artists to come and do new commissions in the space. And that has been really important. From the very outstart, we invited non-Danish artists to present new works and a new installation, whatever, in the space, and that was artists that had not been previously shown in Denmark. Or we invited Danish artists that might have had recognition elsewhere, but had not really been showing extensive project in Denmark. And actually, when we started out in 2001, there was not that much focus on contemporary art in the Danish art scene, to say the least. Institutions seemed reluctant to actually take on the obligation of showing contemporary art at large, and especially contemporary Danish artists. And that was actually a little paradoxical, because it's a generation that started out in the 90s and during the last half, at least second half of the 90s, had a great success internationally, but it was as if it was not really recognized at the time in the Danish institutional landscape, so to speak. So in the start, in the beginning of this space, we actually, I feel, filled out a vacuum that was important. And we were, and the other thing was that, how can I say it? Yeah, I mean, it was also, the National Gallery is an art historical museum. It has a huge collection, it has a lot of obligations to show and present research and exhibitions of other art historical periods and contemporary art. And that was kind of underprivileged at that time in the exhibition program of the institution. So this project space was also an opportunity to actually secure a continuous visibility of contemporary art within the institution itself. The project space as such, the project space format is of course a very well-rehearsed format that has been around art institutions for a long time, so it's not that we really invented something super new in that sense. I think MoMA initiated their project space in the late 80s, and throughout the 90s and the 2000s, it was almost mandatory for larger institutions to actually have project space and show contemporary art in that context. And we have, of course, along the way been discussing whether this format is still relevant. I mean, it's almost 14 years, and right now we're actually embarking on the process of applying for new funds for a new 3-year period. The present sponsorship terminates with 2016. So of course it always comes up, well, is it still, I mean, does it still make sense? Could we do something different? But we have again decided to stick with the format and maybe try to develop what we will show in that format, but not really but actually continuing it, because I feel that in times where there's such a focus on larger group shows, on biennials and thematized group shows, I think that this opportunity to actually present, to see, to show single projects by artists, solo projects that are extensive, where the funds are there to actually support a project that you would not really be able to encompass in a group show or elsewhere. I still think it's a super important format, and actually solo presentations of artists are what I really like to see, because I think it gives you a larger and deeper degree of understanding of an artist's overall project if you have the opportunity to once in a while see a bigger project as such. So yeah, I'm still happy with it. Maybe I should tell you a little bit. This is a project that, or an exhibition that Haim Steinbach, the American artist, he did that 2 years ago in the space. I'm just a little randomly showing some examples of the latest shows in the space. He chose to work with the collection, actually, and that was super interesting for us, that he was taking in or including artworks from the collection as a kind of found objects, as is his practice generally. Here it's a little Bruegel painting that he included in this structure that he designed. This is another project. It's by Henrik Olesen, who actually also chose to kind of curate a huge show together with his walls and galleries, Christopher Müller and Daniel Buchholz. So this was kind of mapping of the inspirations and the colleagues and the artists that Henrik has been looking at since his outstart in the art business. So it became this huge exhibition encompassing more than 200 works, actually, including books and videotapes and archival material. This is a project by Lutz Bacher, another American artist. I have, within the last years of the project space, I've been more and more interested in surpassing this whole generational issue that has been so predominant in contemporary art for, maybe that's way back. And I think that at this point, I felt that it was interesting also to bring in older artists, and both Haim Steinbach and Lutz Bacher are well up in their 70s, and to include artist projects in the program by artists that somehow connect to what's happening today, also among younger artists. And I think that has been interesting to try to break down that whole issue of it has to be young art and has to be the very new stuff going on, where I would like to see that newness, find that in the projects themselves. And in terms of what these artists then that we invite into the institution, what they actually bring to an art historical museum as ours, I think that it's extremely important within that environment, which works with a certain statics as this collection. It might be, we might enlarge the collection once in a while, acquire new works and so on, but still it's a very static framework in general. And to actually have an artist working with the institution, producing new works, discussing it, being around for maybe 2 weeks to install and produce a piece, are just extremely important, and it can't really be emphasized enough how important that is. I think it actually introduces this process of actually producing new artwork within the institution, and also give the institution an insight into that process, which is super valuable. There is, of course, and we actually really I try to the degree where the artist is okay with it and have time for it, to actually make sure that the artist is meeting my colleagues in other departments of the institution, that the artist is actually talking to the communication department about, could you do campaigns differently, to the graphic designer in terms of twisting the formats that we normally work with, and normally we succeed doing that. The only really big challenge that I encounter again and again is this obligation of the institution to actually perform in terms of educational material. We have a quite wide audience, a lot of not that used to art museum goers that come to the museum, and that we simply need to accommodate in their, them meeting contemporary art. Some of them not being familiar with that at all, and artists are very often more interested in communicating directly to an art community, which is perfectly understandable. But there is a dilemma that sometimes clashes, and that we haven't resolved yet at all, but still trying to compromise these two formats, or have parallel formats, but it's a challenge. Often we invite, if the artist is interested at all, we invite him or her to do an interview or an artist talk that we videotape and show to the audience, and that's a super good format, because it's valuable, we feel, for the audience to actually see the artist and hear the artist talk about the project themselves. And then about the curator's role, because I'm obviously sandwiched, as you can hear from this dilemma, between the needs and the requirements of the artist on one side, and on the other side, these obligations that we need to fulfill or negotiate in terms of the obligations of the institution. And there's also this challenge of the project space becoming isolated enclosure for contemporary art, and I think we have sometimes fallen into that hole, where this is not just something going on in the corner, kind of, and it also the project space becoming an alibi for doing something with contemporary arts. So it's like, okay, but we do it, it's there, and then you can park it there, and not really. I mean, it's important, that's what the activities going on in the project space is actually included into the overall activities program, and hooked up to other things going on in the museum. And that's not the only contemporary art activity that's going on in the first place. But I think as a curator, to negotiate or mediate between the institution and the artist, it's of course a key issue to understand what are the core of the project, and knowing the project and what is essential, and from that platform be able to negotiate these compromises that always turns up in terms of budget, in terms of educational stuff, and so on. And the trick is, I think, as I touched upon before, is to actually arrange for colleagues to meet the artist. I think we sometimes, in the world of curating and the art world, we forget what a super privileged position it is to actually have access to the artist and to have a dialogue with artists, and we also underestimate the kind of status that's involved with that. So I'm very careful to show that glamour with my colleagues at large, and I find that, and it's so important because it's really, I know this is really details, but it works. I mean, if the gods, if I can feel I can ask the artist to actually do an introduction, a guided tour for my colleagues at the museum, everything goes so much more smoothly. I mean, the guards will, explain stuff to visitors coming in. My colleagues in the ticket counter and information will make sure that to tell people that they should make sure to see this new project and so on. And that's that's really super important. So what else? And then in terms of ethics, which is a big topic, and I don't know if this is really an ethical discussion, but I feel that a core issue in my work is, as I said, have this close dialogue with artists and actually make sure that the ideas and the intentions of the artist are realized to the best possible degree. And I have to say, I often have experienced that artists are very often right. There might be things that cannot be realized because of budgets and practicalities and security issues and stuff like that. But I go far to actually make sure that things are being produced and being presented as the artist wanted. And I think I have succeeded in also making that a success criteria in the institution. And that's really important, that I think we actually, it has actually become a success criteria that the artist is happy, that the artist is satisfied with how things went, with the result obviously, but also the process. And I think that's, we pride ourselves if we have happy artists, and I think that's a big step ahead for quite a dusty institution as ours, and that's great. Then I've been, this was the Lutzbacher show. She worked with these cutouts of Star Wars figures that you meet in a premiere situation in a cinema. This is a fairly older project by Lindsay Sears, who did this huge cardboard structures, a fort and a star, and inside the fort you could see this circular video that she produced for the show, and which later went on. I think that's another great success criteria, that artists bring the works that they produced with us to other institutions. This is a recent show by Brazilian artist Laura Lima, who had this crazy labyrinth of mess built up, and a live performer present throughout the exhibition period. This magician working in the space. This is an early example of a project in 2011 by Jan Bo, and I bring this because it's another. These vitrines that you see here are actually designed in collaboration between Jan Bo and a carpenter who has been working on the museum, but doesn't really carpenting anymore. He's a technician now, but it turned out that he had this beautiful wood in the basement that was part of the old panels and the old late 19th century building of the museum, and that had been pulled down. And this is just an example of how you somehow are able to activate resources in the institution itself and actually have colleagues and staff collaborate to produce new works. That was important. Then I have been thinking a little bit about how these experiences from the project space, these close collaborations with artists, where we, as I said, really try to realize the projects on as close to the intentions of the artist as possible. And I think it actually spills in or feed into how we can then do larger scale projects or exhibitions. This is one installation view from a survey show that I did with Elmgreen and Dragset last year. And that was one of our large-scale exhibitions. It took big galleries on the front hall and stuff like that. And I think that actually this whole gearing of the exhibition, of the institution towards realizing artist's idea also helped this project being not a conventional survey show where you had a chronological sequence of works from their past production, but it actually became huge installations in which they included new work and older work. And I think, I'm not sure, maybe they work like that, they try to do something similar in other institutions, but I think we in particularly succeeded with that. And I think that was also the experiences of the project space that kind of helped that being a natural process. The same thing here with a work, I guess, that we presented also by Jan Wu. You probably heard about it. It's this copy he made of the Statue of Liberty. And he had all these pieces, more than 400 pieces of individual parts of the statue produced in Shanghai. And he had this problem of where to actually store them. Because they were just coming in containers from Shanghai. And we became a kind of open storage for that, so that we would have container come in, unload them, place them in this huge weird space that we have that is almost impossible to use anyway. But it's a public space, and then we would ship them on. We had this for more than a year, and then pieces would go on to other exhibitions elsewhere in the world, and we would ship them off. So it was also, I think, we've been working with him before for the project space, but also working with artists, actually really challenging the formats that we would normally work with. This was kind of insecure, curatorially, it was an insecure task to embark on, because I was like, in the beginning I was like, we need some figurative parts as well, and how much do we get, and could we end up with not having more than 10, and blah, 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 blah. And in the end, I just had to give up control, and that was kind of interesting. But again, I think it could not, I don't think it could have happened if we didn't have that close and tight dialogue with the artist, obviously Yango in particular, but on a general level as well, that we could actually then expand our own idea of what an exhibition should be like. And I think that's one of the great advantages that we bring from these collaborations. I think, yes, last one. So that was my words.